that could freeze you solid before you even realized what was happening. A cold so brutal that cattle would literally freeze standing up like statues in the snow. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is. There. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Alright, find that cozy spot. Take a nice slow breath and just let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're heading back to 1886 and trust me, you're going to be so grateful for that warm, soft bed and the solid roof over your head. So congratulations, you just woke up in the winter of 1886 on the western frontier. Your eyes open slowly to a world of half-light. The air in your tiny cabin is sharp in your lungs, crisp enough to make your nose sting with each breath. Your bed isn't some memory foam miracle. It's a simple wooden frame pushed against the wall, your body cushioned by a straw-filled mattress that crinkles when you shift. The blankets piled on top are heavy, layers of wool and whatever animal hides you manage to prepare during the warmer months. You don't jump up right away. Nope. In this time, the morning ritual begins with just lying there, summoning the courage to leave the relative warmth of your bed because the fire went out hours ago and the temperature inside isn't much better than outside. The windows, if you're lucky enough to, have glass ones and not just oil paper, are frosted over completely. Delicate patterns of ice have formed overnight. Nature's artistry that would be beautiful if it wasn't a reminder of just how cold it is. In the dimness, you can see your breath clouding in front of your face. You reach one hand out from under the covers and instantly regret it. The air feels like it could shatter. This isn't just cold. This is the kind of cold that has teeth. It bites at your exposed skin, making it sting, then go numb alarmingly fast. Finally, knowing that delaying won't make it any easier, you throw the covers back and quickly pull on the clothes you've kept in bed. With you overnight. You learned that trick months ago. Keeping tomorrow's clothes tucked into the foot of your bed means they're not ice cold when you put them on. Smart, right? The pioneers figured out all kinds of little hacks like that. Your feet hit the plank floor and you was even through your wool socks. The cold boards send a shock up. Your legs. Better get that fire going now. Getting a fire started in the morning was basically a race against frostbite. People didn't mess around. This was survival, not comfort. You hurry to the small iron stove in the corner of your cabin. The ashes from last night are cold, but you've prepared for this. Beside the stove is a small pile of kindling thin strips of wood and perhaps some dried grass or paper if you've got it. Most importantly, you've kept a container of matches close by, maybe even in your pocket while you slept to keep them dry. With fingers already growing stiff from the cold, you arrange the kindling, add a few slightly larger sticks, and strike a match. The tiny flame seems impossibly fragile against the vast cold of the room, but you cup your hand around it, protecting it like the precious thing it is. One thing about the Wild West winters, they taught you real quick what mattered, and fire was life. The kindling catches and you feel the first wave of relief wash over you. Then you add a few small splits of wood and finally some larger logs. The cast iron. Stove begins to warm. First, just the metal itself, then gradually radiating heat into the room. It'll be a while before the cabin feels anything close to comfortable, but at least now there's hope. But here's where it gets interesting. You're probably picturing logs of firewood, right? And sure, if you live near forests, that's what you'd use. But across much of the Great Plains, trees were scarce. So, what people burned instead? Buffalo chips. Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like, dried buffalo dung. And when the buffalo were hunted to near extinction, cow chips took their place. Sounds gross to us now, but it was brilliant actually. Once dried, these chips burned hot and steady without much smell. They were everywhere on the plains, free for the gathering. They could be stored easily, and they were a lifesaver when the nearest tree might be miles away. You open the small door of your stove and carefully add a few buffalo chips to the growing fire. They catch quickly, and soon the stove is properly hot. You hold your hands close, letting the warmth seep back into your stiff fingers. The relief is incredible, like when you come in from a freezing day and wrap your hands around a hot mug of coffee. That simple pleasure of warmth returning to cold limbs. Outside, the world is still dark. The sun won't rise for another hour or so. Winter days are short out here, giving you precious little daylight to get everything done, and there's always so much to do just to stay alive. Your cabin isn't big or fancy. Most weren't. We're talking maybe 14, 16 feet, about the size of a modern bedroom. One room where you do everything. Cook, eat, sleep, and on days when the weather is too harsh to go out, work on indoor chores. The walls are made of logs, if you're in a wooded area with the gap, stuffed with mud, moss, clay, whatever was available to keep the wind out. Or maybe you live in a sod house, a soddy. Out on the treeless plains, many settlers built their homes from blocks of prairie sod cut from the ground. Thick walls of dirt and grass roots stacked like bricks. These houses were actually pretty good insulators. Cooler in summer and warmer in winter than a drafty wooden cabin. But they had their own problems. Dirt constantly sifted down from the ceiling. Bugs and even snakes could make themselves at home in your walls, and a heavy rain might just start dissolving your house. You move around the cabin, getting ready for the day. There's a small table, maybe a bench or stool, possibly a trunk where you keep your few extra clothes. And personal items. The windows are tiny. Glass was expensive and hard to transport. And every window was a place where precious heat could escape. Some cabins didn't have windows at all, just a door and maybe a hole in the roof to let smoke out. Speaking of which, as your fire really gets going, the cabin begins to fill with a thin haze of smoke. No chimney is perfect, especially not the hastily constructed ones in pioneer cabins. You've gotten used to it, though. A little smoke is a fair trade for not freezing to death. The stove is now hot enough to cook on, so you set a cast iron pot on top. Inside is water, probably collected from a nearby stream, or melted from snow and some dried beans that have been soaking overnight. You add a small piece of salt pork if you're lucky enough to have it, and that's breakfast started. It'll take a while to cook, but that's fine. You've got chores to do. You pull on more layers before heading outside. Staying warm wasn't just about having a big coat. It was about strategic layering. You start with long underwear, what they called long. Johns made of wool or flannel, these covered you from ankle to wrist, trapping a layer of warm air against your skin. Next comes a heavy shirt, probably flannel or wool. Again, wool was the miracle fabric of frontier life. It keeps you warm even when wet, which is crucial when sweat or snow might be, soaking through your clothes. Cotton, on the other hand, was deadly in winter. Once wet, it loses all insulating properties and actually draws heat away from your body. The saying went, cotton kills. Over the shirt goes a wool vest, giving your core extra protection. Then a thick wool coat or jacket. On your legs, heavy. Wool trousers, often with a layer of leather chaps over them if you'll be riding. Your feet, get several pairs of wool socks and sturdy leather boots waterproofed with beeswax or animal fat. On your hands, mittens work better than gloves for keeping fingers warm. Each finger helps warm the others instead of being isolated. And finally, a hat. Enormous amounts of body heat escape through your head, so settlers never went bareheaded in winter. A wool hat pulled down over your ears was standard. For those who could afford it or make it themselves, fur was even better than wool. Beaver, rabbit, buffalo, these natural insulators kept animals warm through the harshest conditions and could do the same for humans. A fur-lined coat and hat could mean the difference between life and death in a blizzard. And speaking of blizzards, that's what you're worried about today. The sky has that strange, heavy look that old-timers had learned to recognize. A storm is coming. You step outside and the cold hits you like a physical force. It's not just the temperature, though that might be 20 below zero. It's the wind. Out on. The plains, there's nothing to break that wind. No hills, no forests, just flat land stretching for miles. The wind gathers speed and strength, cutting through layers of clothing like they're nothing. Your first job of the day is caring for whatever livestock you have. Maybe a cow for milk, a few chickens, hopefully a horse or mule. These animals are not just farm equipment or food sources. They're your partners in survival. You depend on each other. The small barn or lean-to where they shelter isn't much warmer than outside, but at least it blocks the wind. The animals have huddled together overnight, using each other's body heat to stay warm. Their breath rises in clouds, and the smell of hay and manure is almost pleasant, compared to the sterile emptiness of the winter air. You break the ice that's formed on their water trough. It might be inches thick, and refill it with water you've carried from the well or stream. Then you give them hay or whatever feed you've managed to store up. If you're running low, you might need to give them less than they want. It's a hard calculation. Keep them healthy enough to survive, but make the feed last until spring. As you work, your fingers and toes begin to ache with cold despite your layers. This isn't the mild discomfort of a chilly day. This is the early warning of frostbite. You know not to ignore it. People who didn't respect the cold lost fingers, toes, ears, noses. You've seen it happen to neighbors, seen the blackened flesh. That never heals, right? So you head back inside to the blessed warmth of your stove. Your breakfast has been simmering all this time, filling the cabin with the rich smell of beans and pork. You eat quickly, standing by the stove. The hot food warms you from the inside out, giving you energy for the hours ahead. Outside, the wind is picking up, driving tiny particles of snow and ice that sting when they hit exposed skin. You need to prepare for what's coming. Winter storms on the frontier weren't just inconvenient, they were lethal. The blizzard of January 1887 was one of the worst. 16 inches of snow fell in as many hours. The temperature dropped to 46 degrees, below zero in some places. The wind whipped the snow into drifts that could completely bury a house. People got lost, trying to reach their barns from their back doors. Think about that. Just a few yards from safety, but in the blinding white with no landmarks visible, they wandered in circles until the cold took them. They found bodies in the spring, sometimes just feet from their own homes. So, you know not to take chances. You string a rope from your cabin door to the barn, a lifeline to follow when visibility drops to zero. You bring in extra firewood or buffalo chips, piling them by the stove. You check your food supplies, mentally calculating how long you could last, if the storm keeps you snowbound for days or even weeks. And then you wait. There's a strange heavy silence that comes before a big snow, like the world is holding its breath. The birds have gone quiet. They've either fled south long ago or they're hunkered down, conserving energy. Even the wind seems to pause. Then it begins. First, just a few flakes drifting down lazily. But soon the snow is coming fast and thick, driven sideways by the wind. That's found its voice again. It howls around the corners of your cabin, finding every tiny crack and gap in the walls. Little drifts of snow form on the inside windowsills. You add more fuel to the fire, building it higher than you normally would. Heat is life now. The temperature outside is dropping rapidly as the storm intensifies. By nightfall, it might be 30 or 40 below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Inside, you light a candle or an oil lamp. The flickering light creates a small circle of warmth that feels incredibly precious against the howling darkness outside. You make a simple dinner, more beans, maybe some cornbread if you have the ingredients. Then you prepare for a long night. Sleep won't come easy with the wind screaming around your cabin. It sounds almost alive, angry, looking for a way in. You pile every blanket you own onto your bed. Maybe you heat rocks in the fire, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them under the covers to create pockets of warmth. It's an old trick, but an effective one. As you lie there listening to the storm, you realize something important. Out here, nobody survives alone. The people who make it through are the ones who look out for each other. You think about your nearest neighbors, maybe a mile or two away. Are they prepared? Do they have enough firewood? Enough food? When the storm breaks, you'll check on them if you can. That's just what people did. Communities came together, sharing resources, knowledge, and labor. Barn raisings, harvests, house buildings. These were community events where everyone pitched in. The same spirit saw people through winters. If someone ran out of food or fuel, others shared what they had, not out of charity, but because they knew next time it might be them needing help. And that was the true secret to surviving the brutal cold of the wild West, the warmth of human connection. People innovated, adapted, and endured incredible hardships, but they rarely did it alone. As you settle deeper into your bed, finding that perfect warm spot, you can feel your muscles relaxing despite the storm's fury outside. The contrast makes your current comfort all the sweeter. The wild, deadly cold just inches away beyond your walls, while you're wrapped in warmth that your own hands have created and maintained. Your breathing naturally slows as you picture those early settlers bundled in their woolens and furs gathered around. Iron stoves while blizzards raged outside. There's something deeply comforting about human resilience, about our ability to create pockets of safety. In the harshest environments, you shift slightly, getting more comfortable as the wind continues its ancient song outside your window, grateful for the sturdy walls between you and the elements. Morning comes slowly after a night of bitter cold. The blizzard has settled into a steady snowfall, less violent, but no less dangerous. Inside your frontier cabin, the fire has burned low again. That first moment of leaving your warm nest of blankets is still a shock to the system, but this time, you're quicker about rebuilding the fire, your fingers remembering the dance of survival that winter on the frontier demands. The inside of your cabin walls are rimed with frost where your breath froze during the night. It sparkles in, the faint light coming through snow-covered windows, beautiful in its way, though that beauty comes with teeth. As the fire catches and grows, you peer outside. The world has been transformed. Where there was a yard, a path, familiar landmarks, now there's only white. Snow has drifted against the side of your cabin, reaching halfway up the wall in places. Your world has shrunk to this small space, this island of relative warmth in an ocean of white and cold. The winter of 1886 to 1887 wasn't just another hard season. It was the kind of winter that rewrote history. They would later call it the Great Die-Up, a grim play on words from the usual roundup of cattle, because that winter killed cattle by the hundreds of thousands across the Great Plains. The summer before had been unusually hot and dry. Prairie fires had swept across the grasslands, leaving little forage for grazing animals. Water sources dried up. Timefall arrived, the land was already stressed, and the animals, both wild and domesticated, were none. We're entering winter in a weakened state. Nature gave warnings to those who knew how to read them. Birds began flying south earlier than usual. Beavers collected more wood than normal for their winter stores. Some cattle grew thicker, shaggier coats than they typically would, but many of the newer settlers, especially the big cattle, ranchers from the East or Europe, didn't recognize these signs. They hadn't learned the language of the land yet. When November brought the first snows earlier and heavier than anyone expected, those who had prepared began to worry. Those who hadn't prepared began to suffer. As you stir your morning porridge, Perhaps oats or cornmeal if you're lucky, maybe just flour and water if supplies are running low ether. You think about food. In winter, food isn't just about staving off hunger. It's about fuel for your body's internal fire. It's about survival. Settlers and Native Americans alike understood that winter required different eating habits. Diets shifted to include more fats and proteins, nutrients that help generate body heat, and maintain energy through the long cold months. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes dried berries, was one of the most important survival foods. Created by indigenous peoples and adopted by fur traders and settlers, it provided dense, long-lasting nutrition that could sustain a person through the harshest conditions. Your own winter stores might include preserved meats, salt pork, smoked venison, dried beef, root vegetables like potatoes, turnips, and carrots stored well in root cellars, or in a pinch buried in straw-filled boxes under your bed where they wouldn't freeze. Dried beans, corn, and flour were staples. Dried fruits provided rare sweetness and vital nutrients. Every frontier family became experts in food preservation out of necessity. Smoking, salting, drying. These weren't crafty hobbies like they might be today. They were essential skills that kept starvation at bay when fresh food was impossible to come by. The fire is blazing now, warming the small space of your cabin. You add a chunk of precious. Coffee to a pot of water if you have it. The bitter drink was worth its weight in gold during winter, not just for the warmth, but for the burst of energy it provided. If coffee is too scarce, you might make tea from pine needles. Not delicious, but rich in vitamin C and helpful for preventing scurvy when fresh. Fruits and vegetables are long gone. Outside, the livestock need tending, and despite the weather, you bundle up layer by layer, creating a cocoon of warmth around your body before facing the onslaught of cold. The clothing that protected people during frontier winters wasn't just functional, it was ingenious. Let's look at it piece by piece from the inside out. Next to your skin, you wear long underwear, what they called long johns. These weren't the lightweight thermals we have today. They were thick, often made of wool or flannel, covering you from ankle to wrist. They might be one piece, a union suit with a button-up flap in the back, or two separate pieces. Either way, they created that first essential layer of insulation around your body. The fabric of your long johns matters enormously. Hand maintains most of its insulating ability even when wet. It also naturally wicks moisture away from the skin, keeping you drier and therefore warmer. Over your long johns goes a shirt, probably flannel or wool. Again, women might wear a heavy dress with multiple petticoats for extra layers. Men often added a wool vest, providing another layer of warmth for the vital organs in your core. Then comes a heavy coat or jacket. Wool was common, but fur was better if you could get it. Buffalo. Coats were prized for their incredible warmth. Bear skin, beaver rabbit, all made excellent winter wear. A good fur coat could last decades if properly cared for. On your legs, men wore heavy wool trousers, sometimes with an extra layer underneath in the coldest weather. Cowboys often added leather chaps, not the decorative kind you might see in rodeos today, but practical coverings that protected against wind, brush, and cold. The warmest chaps were woolies, made from Angora goat hides with the fur still on. These shaggy chaps could help a rider withstand hours in the saddle during freezing conditions. Your feet get special attention because frostbite often attacked extremities first. Multiple pairs of wool socks, then sturdy leather boots waterproofed, with beeswax or animal fat. Some people used foot wraps instead of or in. addition to socks, pieces of cloth strategically wrapped around the feet for insulation. Hands were protected by mittens rather than gloves when possible, since keeping your fingers together allowed them to share warmth. The best mittens had fur on the outside and wool on the inside, with long gauntlets that extended up the forearm to prevent snow from getting in at the wrist. And finally, the hat. Enormous amounts of body heat escape through your head, so no one went bareheaded in winter. Fur hats with ear flaps were ideal. Some people added a wool scarf wrapped around the lower face. A neck, creating a sort of primitive balaclava. Fully dressed for winter, a frontier. Settler looked a bit like a walking bundle of furs and wool. It wasn't pretty or convenient. Layers made movement awkward, and fine manual tasks became difficult with mittened hands, but it kept you alive. You finish dressing and brace yourself for the blast of cold as you open your cabin door. Even expecting it, the intensity is shocking. The air is so cold it feels solid, like you're pushing through it rather than moving in it. Your breath freezes instantly, tiny ice crystals forming in your beard or on your scarf. The snow is deep, maybe 2 feet or more, with drifts much higher in places. Breaking trail to the barn or animal shelter is exhausting work. Each step requires lifting your foot high and pushing through the snow. After just a few yards, you're breathing hard and sweating under all those layers, which is actually dangerous. Sweat can freeze against your skin once you stop moving, rapidly drawing heat from your body. You've strung a guide rope from your cabin to the animal shelter for exactly this situation. When visibility is poor and disorientation is deadly, keeping one gloved hand on the rope, you push forward. The animals greet you with steaming breath and restless movements. They're hungry, thirsty, and confined by the weather just as you are. Your first task is breaking the ice on their water trough. It might be inches thick after a night of below zero temperatures. Then you distribute hay or feed carefully, measuring out what they need. Feed has to last until spring, and in a winter like 1886-87, spring might be a long time coming. For the big cattle ranchers of the plains, this winter was catastrophic. Prior to 1886, the cattle industry operated mainly on the open range. Huge herds roamed freely across unfenced grasslands, fattening themselves on the abundant native grasses. Ranchers simply turned their cattle loose, rounded them up for branding in the spring, and gathered what they could for market in the fall. This system worked well when winters were mild and grass was plentiful, but it created the perfect conditions for disaster when the weather turned brutal. Those free-ranging cattle had no shelter from the blizzards, no supplemental feed when snow covered the grass, and nowhere to go when the temperatures plummeted. The winter of 1886 to 87 changed ranching forever. Cattle died by the thousands, frozen in place where they stood, stacked against fence lines where they had tried to escape the wind or simply starved when they couldn't reach food. Under the deep snow, by spring carcasses littered the plains. The stench, as they thawed, was unimaginable. Rivers were clogged with dead animals washed downstream by the spring melt. Ranchers who had been worth fortunes in the fall found themselves bankrupt by spring. Theodore Roosevelt, who owned a ranch in the Dakota Territory, lost over half his herd and described his losses as crippling. The era of the open range was over. After this winter, ranchers who stayed in business kept smaller herds, grew their own hay for winter feed, and built fenced pastures and shelters. The romantic image of vast herds roaming, free across endless plains, was replaced by the more practical reality of managed grazing and winter preparation. You finish tending the animals and make your way back to the cabin again, following the lifeline of your guide rope. The physical labor has warmed you, but also tired you. Winter is exhausting. Every task takes more energy, more planning, more care. Back inside, you shed your outer layers and hanging them near but not too near the stove to dry. Any moisture from snow or sweat needs to evaporate before you wear them again. The middle of winter days pass in a cycle of necessary tasks. Keeping the fire going, melting snow for water if your well or stream is frozen or inaccessible. Perhaps doing indoor repairs or crafts, mending harnesses, making candles, knitting warm socks, preparing food, checking on animals, and always watching the sky, the wind, the subtle signs that tell you what the weather might do next. Winter changed daily routines dramatically. People scheduled essential outdoor chores for the warmest part of the day, usually between 10 a.m. and 200 p.m. Heavy labor was minimized to conserve energy when food might be limited. Travel was curtailed except in emergencies. But winter also created a different kind of community. Isolated in their cabins or farms, settlers couldn't physically gather as often, but they became more interdependent. If someone ran low on food or fuel, neighbors shared what they had. After storms, people checked on one another, sometimes digging through snowdrifts to reach buried cabins. For many Native American tribes, winter was traditionally a time of community gathering, storytelling, and passing down cultural knowledge. Extended families would camp together, sharing resources and protection. The Winter Count, a pictorial history of the tribe, recorded on buffalo hide, would be brought out and new events added, connecting each generation to those that came before. Winter also required mental adaptations. The short days, long nights, and social isolation could lead to what settlers called cabin fever, restlessness, irritability, and sometimes more serious, depression or even psychosis. Those who thrive develop strategies to keep their minds engaged. Reading, crafts, music, games, and storytelling. The early afternoon brings a subtle change in the weather. The constant snowfall begins to taper off, and occasionally the cloud cover thins enough to allow watery sunlight to filter through. It's not exactly a break in the storm, but it's a brief respite. You take advantage of the slightly improved conditions to check your immediate surroundings, the condition of your cabin's roof under the weight of snow, any drifts that might be blocking necessary paths, the state of your wood pile or fuel supply. The world outside is transformed and strangely beautiful. The snow has rounded every sharp edge, buried every familiar landmark. It sparkles in the filtered sunlight like millions of tiny diamonds. The air, when not being driven by wind, has an extraordinary clarity and stillness that seems almost supernatural to modern sensibilities. There's a profound silence broken only by the occasional creak of snow-laden branches or the distant call of a hardy winter bird. It's beautiful, yes, but beauty in winter could be deadly if it lured you into complacency. Many settlers describe the hypnotic effect of certain winter conditions, the peace and beauty that made them want to rest just for a moment in the snow. But giving in to that urge often meant never getting up again. The cold would dull your senses, slowing your heart and breathing until you simply drifted from sleep to death. So, you admire the transformed landscape, quickly, then return to the safety of your cabin. Inside, you add more fuel to the fire and consider dinner. Winter meals were often stews or soups that could simmer all day, making the most of limited ingredients and providing hot, filling nourishment. Perhaps you're making a bean soup with a small piece of salt pork for flavor, or a stew of preserved meat and root vegetables. Bread or biscuits would be baked near the fire. If you have lard or tallow, rendered animal fat that would be spread on the bread, calorie-dense fuel for your body's internal furnace. The short winter day is already fading. Toward dusk, you light a candle or an oil lamp, its small flame creating a circle of golden light that feels incredibly precious against the gathering darkness outside. Artificial light was scarce and valuable on the frontier. Candles were often homemade, from tallow or beeswax. Oil for lamps might be whale oil, kerosene, or rendered animal fat. These lights were used sparingly, only when necessary for tasks that couldn't be done by firelight. As evening deepens into night, you bank the fire in your stove, arranging the coals and partially burned wood, then covering them with ashes so they'll smoulder slowly all night without needing to be constantly tended. It's a skill that takes practice to perfect, but it means the difference between waking to a cabin that's merely cool and one that's freezing with a completely dead fire. You prepare for bed with the same careful attention to warmth. Maybe you heat rocks in the fire, then wrap them in cloth to place under your blankets. Some settlers filled jugs with hot water for the same purpose. The bed would be arranged strategically. Multiple blankets layered so that the weight was evenly distributed, perhaps with the softest ones against your skin, and the heaviest or roughest on top. As you settle in for the night, your thoughts might turn to spring. It seems impossibly distant in this frozen world, but you know it will come eventually. The snow will melt, the grass will green, life will return to the dormant landscape. That hope, that certainty of eventual change helped generations of settlers endure winters that tested the limits of human resilience. They survived not just through physical preparation and adaptation, but through the mental fortitude that allowed them to see beyond the immediate hardship to the renewal that would follow. You pull the blankets up to your chin, feeling the pleasant weight of them pressing you gently into the mattress. The cabin is quiet except for the occasional pop or shift of the fire in the stove. Outside, the wind has picked up again, but its howl seems distant and unimportant now that you're wrapped in layers of warmth. Your body feels heavy with the honest fatigue of a day spent in the business of survival. Each muscle gradually releases its tension as you breathe slowly and deeply. There's a profound satisfaction in having met the challenges of another winter day, having kept the fire burning, the animals fed, your small space of safety intact against the vastness of cold outside. As your breathing slows naturally, you gaze at the faint orange glow of the banked fire visible through the cracks in the stove door. That small light is a beacon of human ingenuity and perseverance, the ability to create warmth and safety even in the most hostile environments. You shift slightly, finding that perfect comfortable position, feeling your shoulders drop and your jaw relax as the quiet darkness of a frontier night settles around you like a familiar friend. The blizzard settles into a rhythm over the next few days, sometimes raging with renewed fury, sometimes easing enough to allow brief ventures outside. Inside your frontier cabin you've settled into a rhythm too. The harsh realities of winter have imposed a kind of simplicity on daily life that has its own strange comfort. Morning comes with a now familiar routine, the shock of cold air as you leave your warm bed, the careful rebuilding of the fire, the layers of clothing, the trek to care for animals, the constant, never-ending vigilance against the cold that waits just outside. Your walls, patient and hungry, but today something is different. As you step outside, you notice the wind has died down completely. The air is still brutally cold. Your breath freezes instantly in your beard or on your scarf. But the absence of wind makes it feel almost peaceful. The snow-covered landscape stretches away and gentle, swells and dips, blindingly white under a sky that has finally cleared to a pale distant blue. In this moment of relative calm, you decide to check on your nearest neighbors. In the isolated homesteads of the frontier, neighbors might be miles apart, but the bonds between them were often stronger than in more populated places. Winter survival depended on community as much as individual preparation. You harness your horse to the sled or a wagon if you're fortunate enough to have one. If not, you might set out on horseback or even on foot, though distances that seem manageable in. Summer became treacherous journeys in winter. Either way, you dress in your warmest layers, pack some food and a blanket. Getting stranded between destinations could be fatal and set out. Breaking trail through deep snow is exhausting work. Even with a horse, the animal plunges forward, snow sometimes reaching its chest while the sled or wagon behind cuts a path that might be used for days or weeks to come. You keep your eyes fixed on landmarks, a distinctive tree, a rise in the land, the smoke from a distant chimney. Getting lost in this white vastness would mean death. Navigating in winter was a serious skill on the frontier. Without the benefit of GPS, cell phones, or even reliable maps, travelers relied on intimate knowledge of the landscape and careful observation. Native Americans and experienced settlers could read subtle signs invisible to the untrained eye. The way certain trees leaned, the pattern of stars, the behavior of local wildlife. They passed this knowledge down through generations, creating mental maps that were often more detailed and practical than anything on paper. For newer settlers, winter travel was riskier. Many tied bells to their horses so that if they became disoriented in a sudden snowstorm, the sound might guide them back to their wagon or sled. Others strung guide ropes between buildings on their own property to prevent getting lost between house and barn. Stories abounded of people found frozen just yards from their own doors, having become disoriented in whiteout conditions. After what feels like hours of careful progress, you spot your neighbor's cabin, a small dark shape against the overwhelming white. Smoke rises from the chimney in a straight column, a good sign that someone is alive and well inside. Your arrival is met with genuine joy. Winter visitors were rare, and welcome breaks in the isolation that could stretch for weeks or months. You're ushered inside to thaw by the fire, offered whatever food and drink is available. Hospitality was never refused in this harsh environment where turning someone away could mean their death. The conversation turns, as it inevitably did in winter, to survival. How are the food stores holding out? Is there enough feed for the livestock? Has anyone been sick? What news, if any, has filtered in from more distant communities? This exchange of information wasn't just socializing. It was a vital network of mutual support. If one family was running low on a particular supply, others would share what they could. If someone hadn't been seen or heard from, for too long a group might organize to check on them. Knowledge about weather patterns, wild food sources, medical treatments using available plants, more efficient ways to insulate or heat was freely shared because it benefited everyone. In severe winters like 1886-87, these community bonds were tested to their limits. As supplies dwindled and conditions worsened, the sharing of resources could mean dividing scarcity rather than abundance, yet numerous. Accounts from the period describe extraordinary acts of generosity, people going hungry to feed neighbors' children, traveling through dangerous conditions to bring medicine to the sick, sharing the last of their firewood or food. After exchanging news and sharing a simple meal, you prepare to head back to your own cabin before daylight fades. Winter days are short, perhaps only 8 or 9 hours of true daylight in the northern plains, and being caught out after dark multiplies the dangers. Your neighbors might send you home with something. Eggs if their chickens are still laying, a loaf of bread, some preserved fruit, not because they have plenty to spare, but because that's how communities functioned. The gifts would be reciprocated when possible, creating a web of mutual obligation that helped everyone survive. The journey back follows the trail you broke earlier. making it less physically demanding, but still requiring constant vigilance. The temperature drops rapidly as the sun begins to sink toward the horizon. Cold that was merely painful during the day becomes dangerous now. You keep your eyes on your own cabin, watching the thin wisp of smoke from your carefully banked morning fire. It seems impossibly distant, though it can't be more than a mile or two. Distance itself seems different in winter, stretched and distorted by the effort required to traverse it, and the consequences of miscalculation. The sky is changing color as you finally reach home. Pale blue deepening to indigo with the western horizon painted in brief spectacular streaks of orange and pink. Winter sunsets on the plains could be breathtaking. The pure cold air creating colors more vivid than summer's hazy warmth, but you don't linger to admire it. Beauty is secondary to warmth and safety. Now inside your cabin, the fire has burned low but not out. You feed it carefully, coaxing the embers back to flames with kindling and then larger pieces of wood or buffalo chips. The simple act of building a fire, something humans have done for tens of thousands of years, takes on almost sacred significance in winter. Is not just comfort, it's life itself. As feeling returns to your cold, numbed fingers and toes, a painful process of prickling and burning that old-timers called the screaming mimmies, you reflect on the different ways various people survived winter on the frontier. Native American tribes had centuries of accumulated knowledge about winter survival, adapted specifically to their local environments. The Plains tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Black Feet used teepees that were remarkably well suited to harsh winters. Though made of buffalo hide rather than the solid walls we might associate with winter protection, a properly constructed teepee was surprisingly warm. The conical shape and central fire created excellent ventilation, drawing smoke up and out while minimizing heat loss. The outer cover could be raised or lowered depending on conditions, and an inner lining created an insulating airspace while also preventing drafts. In the coldest weather, the bottom edge would be banked with snow for additional insulation. TPS could also be taken down and moved quickly if game migrations or weather made a change of location necessary. The Plains tribes also adapted their entire way of life to the seasonal cycle. Many followed the buffalo herds in summer and early fall, then wintered. In sheltered river valleys where wood was available and the worst of the wind was blocked. Their winter camps were community affairs with extended families, and groups camping together for mutual support and protection. For European settlers, winter survival strategies depended partly on where they came from. Scandinavian immigrants already familiar with harsh winters brought techniques like double wall construction, where two wooden walls were separated by a layer of insulating material. German settlers introduced cast iron stoves that were more efficient than open fireplaces, radiating heat evenly while using less fuel. Those who came from milder climates had a steeper learning curve. There are heartbreaking accounts of families from England, Italy, or the American South who weren't prepared for the intensity of plains winters. Some died, others survived only through the intervention of more experienced neighbors who taught them essential skills. One of the most remarkable winter dwellings was the dugout. Literally a home dug into the side of a hill or into the ground itself, with an earthen roof supported by salvaged timber. These homes looked primitive but were actually excellent at maintaining a constant temperature. The thick earth walls kept heat in during winter and stayed cool in summer. Many families lived in dugouts while gathering materials for more conventional homes, but some chose to remain in them for years because of their practical advantages. Sod houses built from blocks of prairie, turf cut and stacked like bricks, offered similar benefits. The thick walls of dirt and grass roots provided excellent insulation. They were cool in summer, and with a good stove could be kept reasonably warm in winter. Their main drawbacks were the tendency to leak during heavy rains and the constant sifting of dirt onto everything inside. Still, in areas where timber was scarce or expensive, a soda was often the most practical option. Night has fully fallen now. Your cabin is dark except for the firelight and perhaps a single candle or lamp. You prepare a simple dinner, maybe the last, of a stew that's been simmering all day, stretching a small amount of meat with more plentiful beans, turnips, or potatoes. Food preservation was a critical skill for winter survival. Without refrigeration, keeping food edible through months when nothing fresh could be grown required multiple strategies. Smoking meat was one of the most effective methods. A properly smoked ham, bacon, or beef could last for months without spoiling. The smoking process involved first curing the meat with salt to draw out moisture, then hanging it in a smokehouse where it absorbed preservative compounds from slowly burning hardwood. The result was not only preserved, but often delicious. Salting was another common preservation method, especially for meat and fish. The meat would be packed in salt or soaked in a strong brine solution. The salt drew out moisture and created an environment hostile to bacteria. Properly salted meat could last an entire winter, though it required thorough soaking before cooking to make it palatable. Root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, turnips, and onions could be stored in root cellars, underground rooms, or pits where the earth's stable temperature kept them from freezing or spoiling. A well-constructed root cellar maintained temperatures just above freezing even when outside temperatures plunged far below zero. Fruits were often dried in the summer sun, then reconstituted in winter for pies, sauces, or just eating as is. Berries, apples, peaches, anything that could be sliced thin. Enough to dry thoroughly could be preserved this way. Beans, corn, and other grains were dried on the plant, then stored in rodent-proof containers. These staples form the backbone of winter nutrition, providing carbohydrates and some protein. For indigenous communities, pemmican was the ultimate survival food. Made from dried meat, usually buffalo pounded into powder mixed with melted fat and sometimes dried berries, it was incredibly nutrient-dense and stable. A small amount provided substantial calories and complete nutrition. It was so effective that European fur traders and explorers adopted it, and similar preserved meat products are still used today by military forces and wilderness adventurers. After eating, you prepare for the night ahead. The fire is carefully banked, not too low that it might go out during the coldest hours before dawn, but not so high that it wastes precious fuel. You might heat stones or fill jugs with hot water to place in your bed, creating pockets of warmth that will last for hours. The nighttime routine included careful attention to security. Doors were barred not just against unlikely human intruders, but against the more common threat of desperate predators seeking warmth or food. Windows were shuttered or covered with blankets to prevent heat loss. Then came perhaps the most important winter survival tactic of all: rest. The human body burns calories to maintain core temperature. In extreme cold, this energy expenditure increases dramatically. Adequate rest was essential to conserve energy and maintain health through the long months of winter. Sleep patterns on the frontier differed from our modern schedule. Without abundant artificial light, people generally slept when it was dark and worked when it was light, which meant more sleep in winter, less in summer. Many described a pattern of first sleep and second sleep, sleeping for several hours after nightfall, then waking for an hour or two of quiet activity around midnight before returning to sleep until dawn. This biphasic sleep pattern appears in records from many pre-industrial societies and may actually be more natural for humans than our modern expectation of a single uninterrupted night's sleep. In winter, it allowed people to check and feed fires during the coldest part of the night without having to fully wake from deep sleep. As you settle into your bed, pulling heavy blankets up around your shoulders, your mind might drift to spring. It seems impossibly distant, but experience has taught you it will come eventually. The snow will melt, the grass will return, the birds will sing again. That certainty, that knowledge of the cycle's inevitability, sustained people through even the harshest winters. Not optimism exactly, but a realistic understanding that nothing, not even winter, lasts forever. Your muscles relax one by one as the warmth of your bed cocoons you against the freezing night. The contrast between the deadly cold just inches away beyond your walls and the nest of safety you've created makes the comfort all the sweeter. The sound of the wind, which picked up again after sunset, seems to emphasize rather than threaten your security. Now your breathing naturally falls into a slow, steady rhythm in and out. The strain of the day's work gradually fades from your limbs, replaced by a pleasant heaviness. Your mind drifts to the neighbors you visited, the web of human connection that makes survival possible in this harsh landscape. You feel a sense of belonging, of being part of something resilient and enduring. Outside, the winter night deepens. Stars appear in impossible numbers, brilliant against the black sky in a way that city dwellers rarely experience. Now the moonlight reflects off the snow, creating a strange silvery half-light that's bright enough to cast shadows. Your eyelids grow heavy as you picture that silent, beautiful world outside, continuing its ancient cycles while you rest, gathering strength for tomorrow. Your breathing slows as you sink deeper into comfortable warmth. The contrast with the frozen world outside, making your current comfort all the more precious. The days begin to blend together in the rhythm of winter survival. Each morning brings the same challenges: the fire to be rebuilt, animals to be tended, water to be melted from snow or broken from ice, the constant battle against cold that never fully retreats. Yet within this routine there are subtle changes that only those attuned to the land would notice. The sun rises slightly earlier each day, sets a few minutes later. The quality of light shifts, becoming a touch stronger, less watery. These almost imperceptible changes are promises written in the sky. Spring will come, though winter still holds the land firmly in its grip. In your frontier cabin, you've developed a system for getting through these long days and nights. Every task is organized around conserving heat and energy while maintaining the essentials of life. The fire in your stove or fireplace is the heart of this system, never allowed to go out completely, carefully managed to provide maximum warmth with minimum fuel. Near the stove, you've created a space for drying. Mittens, socks, boots placed where they can lose moisture without scorching. Damp clothing in winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it could be deadly, drawing precious heat from the body. Far from the stove, in the coldest corners of your cabin, you store foods that need to stay frozen. Meat perhaps, or containers of milk that freeze into a sort of primitive ice cream. The cabin itself might be fairly small by modern standards, perhaps 14 or 16 feet for a typical one-room structure. In this limited space, every item has its place and purpose. Beds might double as seating during the day. Tables fold against walls when not in use. Shelves and hooks maximize vertical storage. This morning, as you go about your routine, you notice something different outside. The snow has developed a faint crust on top, still soft enough to break through when walked on, but definitely changed from the powdery fluff of previous days. To experienced eyes, this is another small sign of the seasonal progression. Slightly warmer daytime, temperatures allowing the very top layer to melt just a bit, then refreeze at night. Weather reading was an essential skill for frontier survival, especially in winter when conditions could turn deadly within hours. Before modern forecasting, people relied on careful observation of natural indicators combined with generational knowledge passed down through families and communities. Cloud formations, wind direction, animal behavior, even the way smoke rose from chimneys all provided clues about coming weather. Many of these observations were codified in sayings or rhymes that made them easier to remember and pass along. Red sky at night, sailors delight, red sky in morning, sailors take warning. Or, when clouds appear like towers, the earth is refreshed by frequent showers. The ability to predict weather wasn't just convenient, it was sometimes the difference between life and death. Knowing when to hurry home ahead of a blizzard, when to harvest before a killing frost, or when conditions were right for travel could determine survival in this unforgiving environment. Indigenous peoples had developed sophisticated weather prediction systems specific to their regions over thousands of years. Many tribes had designated weather watchers, individuals with special training and aptitude for reading natural signs. Their forecasts guided decisions about hunting, gathering, traveling, and preparing shelter. European settlers brought their own weather wisdom, often specific to their countries of origin. This knowledge sometimes had to be adapted or discarded when it proved unreliable in the different climate of North America. Through trial and error, sometimes fatal error, new weather law emerged that combined indigenous knowledge, immigrant, traditions, and hard-won frontier experience. You step outside to begin your daily chores, bundled against the cold but moving purposefully to generate body heat without sweating. The animals need tending first. They depend entirely on human care to survive winter in their domesticated state. The livestock, perhaps a milk cow, a few chickens, maybe a pig being fattened for spring slaughter, have their own ways of adapting to cold. Animals naturally grow thicker coats as winter approaches. They huddle together for shared warmth and shelter from wind when possible. But domesticated animals required human intervention to survive extreme cold. Barns and other shelters needed to be as carefully prepared for winter as human dwellings. Cracks were sealed against drafts. Hay was stacked to create additional insulation along walls. Water troughs were placed indoors if possible to prevent constant freezing. The winter of 1886-87 was particularly devastating for livestock, especially cattle on the open. Range. The combination of drought the previous summer, early heavy snows, and record-breaking cold created conditions that even the hardiest animals couldn't survive without help. Ranchers who lost thousands of cattle during this catastrophic winter changed their practices dramatically afterward. This era of vast, unfenced, unmanaged herds on the open range effectively ended. Those who stayed in the cattle business adopted new approaches: smaller herds, fenced pastures, hay production for winter feed, and sturdier shelters. This shift transformed not just ranching, but the entire culture and economy of the West. The romantic image of the cowboy constantly on the move with semi-W wild cattle gave way to more settled, farm-like operations. The last great cattle drives occurred in the early 1890s. By 1900, railroads had expanded enough to make drives unnecessary, and fenced land made them impossible in many areas. As you finish caring for your animals, you glance at the sky, reading the signs for today's weather. The clear, brittle blue suggests continued cold, but there's a high, thin layer of clouds moving in from the west that might bring changes later. For now, it's safe enough to tackle an outdoor project you've been putting off, perhaps repairing a damaged fence, cutting more firewood, or clearing snow from a pathway. Winter work on the frontier required careful planning, The most strenuous tasks were best done during the warm mist. Part of the day, usually between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. work, was paced to avoid excessive sweating, which could freeze against the skin once activity stopped. And everything took longer than in milder seasons. Layers of clothing, restricted movement, snow created obstacles, and cold, stiffened fingers struggled with fine tasks. Yet, winter also brought its own unique opportunities. Some jobs were actually easier in the cold months. Logging, for example, was primarily a winter activity. Frozen ground made it easier to drag heavy logs out of the forest, and snow provided a slick surface for sleds heavily laden with timber. Ice harvesting was an essential winter industry in the era before refrigeration. Workers cut blocks from frozen lakes and rivers, then stored them in specially built ice houses, packed with sawdust or straw for insulation. These ice blocks would last well into summer, providing cooling for food preservation and even luxury items, like ice cream. Winter was also prime time for trapping. Animal furs were at their thickest and most valuable during the cold months. For some frontier families, the income from winter trapping made the difference between subsistence and modest prosperity. By midday, you've made good progress on your outdoor work. The physical activity has kept you warm despite the cold air, but you're ready for a break and some food. You head back to your cabin where the fire has been carefully banked to maintain heat with minimal fuel while you are gone. Lunch might be a simple affair, perhaps bread and cheese or leftover stew warmed up on the stove. Winter diets on the frontier were noticeably different from summer fare. Fresh vegetables and fruits were rare or non-existent unless you had a remarkable root cellar or food preservation system. Meals centered around stored staples, flour, beans, rice, potatoes, preserved meats with little variety compared to other seasons. This monotonous diet contributed to a common winter ailment called cabin fever, a combination of vitamin deficiency, boredom, confinement, and isolation that could cause irritability, lethargy, and even more serious mental health issues. Indigenous peoples had developed strategies to combat these problems. Many tribes harvested vitamin-rich plants like rosehips in fall and preserved them specifically for winter use. They also maintained active social calendars during winter months with ceremonies, games, and storytelling sessions that kept communities connected and engaged despite confinement. Settlers adopted some of these practices and developed their own traditions to cope with winter isolation. Quilting bees, barn dances, church socials, and literary societies helped maintain mental health through social connection. Families created evening rituals of reading aloud, music making, or game playing to combat boredom. Education took on special importance during winter months when children couldn't help with outdoor farm work. Many frontier schools operated primarily in winter, closing during planting and harvest seasons when young hands were needed in the fields. For families too far from established schools, winter became the time for concentrated home education, teaching children to read, write, cipher, and learn practical skills that would serve them in frontier life. The afternoon brings a subtle change in the weather. The high clouds you noticed earlier have thickened and lowered, creating a grey ceiling that dims the already weak winter sunlight. The wind shifts, coming now from the south, slightly warmer, but carrying moisture that feels damp against your skin. These are signs that weather may be shifting, though weather towards spring like thaw or another winter storm remains to be seen. You use the remaining daylight hours to prepare for either possibility. More firewood is stacked close to the cabin in case another storm makes venturing out difficult. Water containers are filled. Food is prepared that could be eaten cold if necessary. These precautions might seem excessive in our modern world of reliable utilities and weather forecasts. But on the frontier, such readiness was simply common sense. As darkness falls earlier than it would. In more southern latitudes, you light your lamp or candle and settle in for the evening, Artificial light was precious on the frontier. Candles were often homemade from tallow rendered animal fat or beeswax if available. Oil lamps burned whale oil, kerosene, or other fuels that might be expensive or hard to obtain. As a result, many frontier families simply adapted their schedules to natural light, rising with the sun, sleeping when darkness fell, and using precious artificial light only when absolutely necessary. This early nightfall created long evening hours, especially in winter. How these hours were filled depended on the family's resources, education, and traditions. Reading was common among literate families who had books or newspapers, though the latter might be weeks or months old by the time they reached remote homesteads. Handcrafts flourished during these evening hours. Whittling, carving, sewing, knitting, quilting, weaving. These weren't just hobbies. They produced essential items for family use, or for barter with neighbors. Tools, clothing, or decorative items during the enforced indoor time of winter. Music was another common evening pastime. Even humble frontier homes might have a fiddle, harmonica, or penny whistle. Singing required no instruments at all and could be enjoyed by anyone. Folk songs, hymns, and ballads were passed down through generations, preserving cultural heritage and providing entertainment long before recorded music existed. Storytelling reached its height during winter evenings. Families shared tales of their ancestry, recounted historical events, or simply made up stories to entertain one another. These oral traditions served multiple purposes: entertainment, education, cultural transmission, and strengthening of family bonds. For indigenous communities, winter was traditionally the season for certain sacred stories. Many tribes had traditions that specified some tales could only be told when snow was on the ground, enforcing a seasonal rhythm to the oral literature that corresponded with natural cycles. Your own evening might include any of these activities depending on your background and resources. Perhaps you read by lamplight for an hour, mend clothing that's shown wear during daily chores, or simply sit by the fire planning the next day's tasks or remembering winters past. The sounds of a winter night on the frontier were distinctive. The crackle of the fire, the occasional settling of logs in the cabin walls as they contracted in the cold, the distant howl of a wolf or coyote, the wind's constant conversation with every obstacle in its path. These sounds formed a kind of music that modern ears accustomed to the constant background noise of technology might find either unsettling or profoundly peaceful. As bedtime approaches, you bank the fire for the night, carefully arranging the coals and partially burned wood, then covering them with ashes so they'll smoulder slowly until morning. This technique, mastered through practice and sometimes learned through bitter experience, meant the difference between waking to a cabin that was merely cool and one that was freezing with a completely dead fire. The bed calls to you now, a simple wooden frame with a straw-filled mattress that's nothing like our modern pillow tops, but feels welcoming after a day of physical work. Blankets have been warming near the fire and are now arranged in careful layers, perhaps wool on the bottom where it touches your skin, then heavier hides or quilts on top. You might place heated rocks wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed, or fill jugs with hot water for the same purpose. These would radiate warmth for hours, taking the deadly chill off the bedding and helping you fall asleep comfortably instead of shivering for the first hour. Sleep came differently on the frontier. Without electric lights, television, or the internet to disrupt natural circadian rhythms, people generally fell asleep more quickly after dark and woke more naturally with dawn. Winter brought longer sleep periods that balanced the shorter, more active days of summer. This natural rhythm following the seasons rather than fighting them may have contributed to overall health despite the physical hardships of frontier life. Dreams in winter might be different too, influenced by the intense quiet outside, the absolute darkness broken only by firelight, and the knowledge of the deadly cold just beyond the cabin walls. Some frontier diaries and letters describe especially vivid dreams during winter isolation, as if the mind needed to create its own journeys when the body was confined. As you settle deeper into your bed, pulling the heavy blankets up to your chin, you're aware of the contrast between your warm cocoon and the freezing world outside. There's something profound in this juxtaposition, the fragility of human life against the vast indifference of winter, yet also the remarkable ingenuity that allows you to create comfort in such hostile conditions. Your body feels pleasantly heavy, each muscle releasing the day's tension as you breathe slowly and deeply. The stresses of survival, the constant vigilance, the physical labor, the need for careful planning fade for these few hours of rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but for now, there is just this moment of peace. Outside, the night deepens. Perhaps snow begins to fall again. Silent, gentle flakes that accumulate without the violent wind of a true blizzard. Or maybe the sky clears, revealing stars in numbers that modern city dwellers can scarcely imagine, their cold light reflecting off the snow in a luminous glow that makes midnight brighter than many modern afternoons. Your breathing naturally slows as you sink deeper into comfort. The cabin cacks softly as it settles in the cold, a sound so familiar it's become a lullaby. Of sorts, you shift slightly, finding that perfect position where every limb is supported and warm. A yawn escapes, your jaw relaxing as the quiet darkness wraps around you like an old friend. The weight of the blankets presses you gently into the mattress, a comforting pressure that reminds you of safety in this wild, cold land. Days pass in the steady rhythm of winter survival. Outside your frontier cabin, the landscape remains transformed by snow and ice, but subtle changes are beginning to appear for those who know how to read them. The quality of light shifts minutely each day, growing stronger, lingering a bit longer. Snow develops different textures as temperatures fluctuate, sometimes forming a hard crust that bears weight, sometimes softening into wet heaviness that clings to boots and clothes. These are the first whispers of spring, though winter's grip remains firm. On the frontier, these transitional weeks could be some of the most challenging of the entire year. Food stores carefully rationed through the coldest months might be running low. Humans and animals alike grew weary of confinement, and the weather itself became unpredictable. Bitter cold snaps alternating with brief thaws that turned snow to treacherous mud before freezing again. This morning you wake to an unfamiliar sound, a steady dripping from the eaves of your cabin. The temperature has risen overnight, climbing just above freezing for the first time in weeks. Outside, the snow has developed a glazed wet surface that reflects sunlight with almost painful brightness. The air feels different too, still cold but with a dampness that hints at change. For people who had survived the brutal winter of 1886-87, these first signs of thaw brought complicated emotions. Relief. Certainly the deadly cold was loosening its hold, but also anxiety about what they would find as the snow melted. How many cattle had survived? Were fences and outbuildings still standing? What damage would be revealed when frozen ground thawed into spring mud? For the cattle barons who had dominated the Western economy before this catastrophic winter, the thaw would reveal the full extent of their losses. Theodore Roosevelt, who owned a ranch in the Dakota Territory during this winter, later wrote, "The losses were crippling. For the first time, I've been utterly unable to enjoy a visit to my ranch." He lost over half his herd and more than half his investment. The spring of 1887 revealed a landscape of death across the Great Plains. As the snow receded, carcasses appeared everywhere. Cattle frozen where they stood, piled against fence lines where they had sought shelter from the wind, washed downream in grotesque log jams when rivers began to flow again. The stench, by all accounts, was unimaginable. This single winter changed the entire course of Western development. The open range era essentially ended. The cattle industry transformed from one based on free-ranging, minimally managed, vast herds to smaller fenced operations with winter feeding and shelter. Land use patterns shifted. Economic power realigned. For individual families like the one in our story, spring brought its own challenges and rituals. As soon as weather permitted, there was an explosion of outdoor activity, repairs to structures damaged by winter, preparations for planting, assessment of livestock, reconnection with neighbors who might have been inaccessible for months. The cabin that had been a place of confinement suddenly felt too small, too dark, too full of the accumulated smells and tensions of winter. Spring cleaning wasn't just a tradition, it was a psychological necessity. Throwing open doors and windows on the first truly warm day, airing bedding, scrubbing floors, perhaps even taking the radical step of bathing more thoroughly than had been possible during winter's water shortages. Spring also brought renewed social connections. Communities gathered for celebrations, barn raisings, shared labor, and simple enjoyment of company beyond immediate family. After months of isolation, these gatherings had a special sweetness, reinforcing the bonds that had helped everyone survive. For indigenous peoples, spring meant return to seasonal migrations for many tribes following game and plant food sources that became available as the land awakened. Traditional ceremonies mark the transition, thanking the spirits for survival through winter and asking for blessings on the coming seasons of growth. For farmers and ranchers, spring was a time of both promise and anxiety. Would the weather cooperate for planting? Had enough livestock survive to rebuild herds? Were there sufficient seeds, tools, and strength to begin again after winter's depletion? The resilience demonstrated by frontier communities during winters like 1886-87 remains awe-inspiring. Without modern technology, emergency services, or communications, people survived. Conditions that would challenge even our most advanced systems today. They did it through preparation, adaptation, community cooperation, and extraordinary mental fortitude. Winter survival strategies developed during this era have left lasting legacies. Many of our modern winter practices, from layered clothing to home insulation techniques, evolved from methods pioneered by indigenous peoples and frontier settlers who learned often through deadly trial and error what worked in extreme conditions. The psychological approaches to winter hardship also offer wisdom for our time. Frontier communities understood the importance of breaking isolation, maintaining routines, creating meaningful indoor work, and finding small pleasures even in the most difficult circumstances. Their seasonal rhythms, more activity in summer, more rest in winter, aligned with natural cycles in ways our electrically lit, climate-controlled modern lives often ignore. Perhaps most importantly, they developed a relationship with winter that was neither romantically naive nor bitterly antagonistic. They respected its dangers without despair, prepared for its challenges without panic, and found beauty in its austerity without forgetting its deadly potential. This balanced perspective allowed not just survival, but a kind of hard-won harmony with the natural world. As the light begins to fade on this transitional day between winter and spring, you return to your cabin after checking on animals and assessing the changes brought by the slight thaw. Inside, the familiar space feels different too. The air less dry, the perpetual chill less pervasive. You still build your evening fire, but perhaps with slightly less urgency than during the depths of winter. Dinner might include something special tonight. Perhaps the last of preserved summer berries mixed into cornbread, or a bit of honey saved for a celebration. These small luxuries marked important transitions on the frontier, where seasons shaped life more directly than in our calendar-driven modern world. As you prepare for sleep, your routine remains similar to winter nights, though, with subtle adjustments. Perhaps fewer blankets on the bed, less banking of the fire since freezing to death is no longer an imminent threat. The gradual easing of survival pressure brings its own kind of peace, a relaxing of the constant vigilance that winter required. You settle into your bed, feeling the familiar comfort of the straw mattress that has cradled your body through months of cold nights. The blankets still create a pleasant weight, though, not as heavy as during January's brutal cold. Outside, nightbirds have returned, their occasional calls marking another sign of the turning season. In this quiet moment between wakefulness and sleep, you might reflect on the winter now potentially ending, the challenges faced, the skills honed, the deeper understanding gained of both human capability and natural power. There's pride in having endured, satisfaction in problems solved, gratitude for the community that made survival possible, and hope for the warmer days to come. This cycle of seasons, each with its dangers and gifts, its work and rest, structured frontier life in ways we've largely forgotten. Modern Americans rarely orient their lives around weather or daylight hours. We've created artificial environments that remain largely consistent regardless of outside conditions. This has brought undeniable benefits, but perhaps also disconnected us from rhythms that shaped human experience for most of our history. The lessons of winters like 1886-87 remain relevant not just as historical curiosities, but as practical wisdom for resilience in the face of challenges beyond our control. The frontier. Settlers and indigenous peoples who survived extreme conditions did so through a combination of preparation, gathering resources during times of plenty, developing skills before they was desperately needed, creating systems that could withstand stress, adaptation, changing practices based on local conditions rather than clinging to familiar but unsuitable methods, learning from experience and observation, remaining flexible when circumstances changed, community sharing, knowledge, resources and labor, checking on vulnerable members, maintaining social connections despite physical isolation. understanding that individual survival depended on collective well-being, mental fortitude, developing routines that supported psychological health, finding meaning in hardship, maintaining hope without denying reality, balancing acceptance of conditions with active problem-solving. These same qualities serve us well in facing our own contemporary challenges, though they take different forms in our changed world. As you lie in your frontier bed, these reflections might drift through your mind like the lazy smoke from your banked fire. But gradually the day's physical work and the room's gentle warmth begin to overcome conscious thought. Your breathing slows and deepens naturally. Your body remembers the hard work of winter survival, the chopping of wood or gathering of buffalo chips, the breaking of trails through deep snow, the constant small movements required to maintain warmth. Now, in the relative security of your bed, each muscle can finally release its vigilance. Starting with your feet, a pleasant heaviness spreads upward through your body. Your toes, which have spent months curled against cold floors and frozen ground, can now uncurl and relax completely. The soles of your feet, tough from work but sensitive to the contrast between cold and warmth, now rest comfortably against the bed. Your ankles, which have stabilized you through snow and ice all winter, can release their tension. The heaviness moves up into your calves and knees, legs that have carried you through drifts and storms now able to rest fully. Your thighs, powerful muscles that have worked so hard for so long, can surrender to the supporting mattress beneath them. Your hips and lower back, often strained by winter's awkward movements and heavy lifting, settle more deeply into the bed. Each vertebra seems to sigh with relief as it aligns naturally, supported perfectly. Your abdomen relaxes, the breath moving easily now without the tension of cold or fear to constrict it. Deep, slow breaths come naturally, each one carrying you further into comfort. Your chest expands and contracts in a steady rhythm, the heart beating strong but calm within. Your shoulders, which have carried so many literal and figurative burdens through the winter, can finally release completely. They broaden and soften, sinking into the bed beneath you. Your arms grow heavy at your sides, hands that have stayed clenched against cold now able to open, fingers uncurling into restful positions. The back of your neck lengthens slightly as tension melts away. Your jaw, often tight from cold or concentration, softens. Your tongue rests easily in. Your mouth, your lips relax, and the tiny muscles around your eyes release their watchfulness. Even your scalp, which has been covered against cold for months, can relax now, sending pleasant tingles across the surface of your head. Your thoughts, like your breath, begin to slow and drift, becoming less distinct, more dreamlike. The sounds around you, perhaps the occasional crackle from the stove, the distant call of returning spring birds, the soft settling of the cabin itself, become part of a gentle background that cradles rather than interrupts your descent towards sleep. This is how people have fallen asleep for thousands of years, gradually, naturally, in rhythm with the world around them. Without artificial light to disrupt circadian rhythms, without digital stimulation to keep the mind racing, sleep came as an extension of day's end, a natural transition rather than an abrupt switch. On the frontier, sleep patterns changed with the seasons, longer in winter's darkness, shorter in summer's extended light. This natural variation following the Earth's rhythms rather than fighting them may have contributed to overall health despite other hardships. Your breath continues its slow, steady rhythm in and out. Each exhalation seems to carry you deeper into relaxation. Each inhalation brings fresh peace rather than renewed alertness. Your consciousness begins to fragment, rational thought giving way to the gentle kaleidoscope of pre-dream images and sensations. You might see fragments of the day just past, the glint of sun on wet snow, the steam rising from a horse's back, the texture of rough-hewn wood under your hand, or perhaps images from deeper memory emerge. The faces of family far away, landscapes from childhood, moments of connectional beauty that the mind treasures and returns to in this liminal space between waking and sleeping. The frontier night deepens around your cabin. Perhaps stars wheel slowly overhead, their cold light filtered through windows to cast faint patterns on your cabin walls. Or clouds might gather, promising more weather changes as winter reluctantly yields to spring. Either way, the darkness outside makes the small circle of security inside. Your bed, your shelter, your life preserved through winter's worst feel, all the more precious. Your eyelids grow heavy now, too heavy, to keep open even if you wanted to. But there's no need for vigilance anymore. No reason to fight the sweet pull of sleep. Each breath becomes slightly deeper, slightly slower. Your heartbeat gentle and regular. The weight of your body against the bed feels perfect, as if you're being held exactly as you need to be. The day's concerns, what needs repair after winter's damage, when to plant, how to rebuild what was lost, fade into background problems for tomorrow's wakeful self. Now, there is just this moment of perfect transition. The mind letting go of its constant activity. The body surrendering to rest. Sleep approaches now like a gentle wave, each breath carrying you closer to its shore. The frontier winter, with all its brutal challenges and life-defining lessons, has shaped you but not broken you. You've survived its worst through ingenuity, community, and remarkable resilience qualities passed down through generations that still serve us today, though our challenges take different forms. Your breathing slows one final notch. Your consciousness shifts from fragmentary airy thoughts to the formless peace that precedes dreams. The last tension in your body dissolves, leaving only the natural weight of complete relaxation and sleep. The great restorer, the daily practice of surrender and renewal that every human shares, regardless of time or place or circumstance, finally claims you completely, carrying you away from the frontier winter into the universal landscape of dreams where past and present, hardship and comfort, struggle and peace all dissolve into the deeper currents of human experience.